Hey there, Universals. I'm delighted to introduce Professor Dame Sue Black, world-renowned forensic anthropologist whose illustrious career has seen her working with the UN on war crimes investigations and with detective teams across the globe to determine how people met their end. We're obviously absolutely thrilled that she's done this collection of cue cards on this totally fascinating subject. I think I'll kick off with the first question, so if you don't mind, which is, how on earth you got into this field in the first place?
Shall I start first of all with what it is, because that might
Yes,
be a
that'd
little
be
bit
great.
easier. So there's two words. The forensic word is a Latin word, and that comes from the word forensis. And forensis means pertaining to the forum, and the forum was the courts of Rome. So anything that's got the word forensic in it means that you are an expert witness to the court. Doesn't mean you work for the police, doesn't mean you investigate anything, just that your evidence goes into court.
Right.
And the anthropology bit is Greek. It's the study of the human. So when you bring them together, it's the study of the human as it's related to the courtrooms. And often for the courtrooms, what they're interested in is who was this person when they were alive and how long have they been dead? And a pathologist will tell you about the manner of death and the cause of death. Our job is to try and tell you who that person was.
How do you get into this? So it's not a medical. Is it a medical degree you do, or a doctorate rather, or is this something you come in via a different route?
It depends in different places around the world. So in some parts of the world, forensic anthropologists are all medically qualified. In the UK, they tend to come through a science route. So I came through the route of human anatomy, and I studied an undergraduate degree in human anatomy at Aberdeen University. And for the first 2 years, you study all sorts of different sciencey things, bits of biology and zoology and genetics and things. But then third year is where you really start to specialize. And in third year human anatomy, you are given a human cadaver and you dissect that human body for an entire year. And you think, it can't take a whole year, surely. But once you cut through the skin and you start to expose the intricacy of human anatomy that lies underneath it there, it actually takes you many, many years to become a competent anatomist.
Correct.
And then from there, my research that I was particularly interested in was in identification. And so when a forensic case came into the region where I was working, the police asked, would I be able to go and help? And so I sort of fell into the forensic side of it almost by accident, but I had that anatomical background and underpinning.
When you started your PhD, you started dissection. Presumably you remember that quite well.
Well, it's a
that's,
rubicon.
I think...
Yeah, it's a rubicon that you never, ever forget. When you walk into a dissecting room, and I must have been 19, so you walk into a dissecting room and it was almost, the room was almost like a big conservatory, like a sort of Victorian conservatory, because it had opaque glass all the way around, and of course opaque glass in the ceiling, because you need lots of natural light. And there are about 50 tables. Each one has a body laying on it, and there's a white sheet over the top. So all you see are these white mounds, and underneath each of those is a body. And the most incredible thing you feel is a weight of responsibility, because that person, when they were alive, chose to donate their body so that you could learn. And that puts a real responsibility on you as a student. But then when you've got to try and get your scalpel blade onto your scalpel and your hands are shaking, and suddenly when you find there's blood, you realize the cadavers don't bleed because they're embalmed. If there's blood, it must be yours, and you've probably cut yourself on your scalpel, which of course everybody does. But once you've got that blade on and you have to make that first incision through skin, it is a Rubicon. You can't recross that.
No.
And we always start on the front of the chest, because if you feel on the front of the chest, there's a bone there that sits right underneath the skin. Mm-hmm. So it means that you can't cut too deeply and you can't destroy everything because you hit bone. So we always start there, because if we started anywhere else, we'd make a mess of it.
And you've got to work with them for a year.
Yes.
It's very hard for anybody who doesn't deal with this regularly to wonder how you can weave that into your life and sort of behave normally from that point on. I guess it's that those nerves, I can imagine sort of the adrenaline, not being able to keep your hands steady when you do it the first time. But that day also is the day that starts. It's not the finish of any process. No. You're working with that that person then for over a year. I mean, what sort of feelings go through your head when you do that for the first
It's
time?
a huge honor, you know, huge responsibility and a huge honor to know that when somebody was alive, they said, I'm going to leave my body to these students. All I ask them to do is learn. And it suddenly sobers you up as a student. But I think I'd probably had a little bit of an initiation before then, because my father, well, I loved my father, just adored my father. And he was a great shot. And so from about the age of 5 or 6, I'd go out with my father when he was shooting, and it would be rabbits and pigeons and that sort of thing. And they would be taken home for mother to cook. And I would go anywhere with my father. So I'd come home carrying dead rabbits or dead pheasants. And because my mother was a bit squeamish, I would sit at the back door with my father. So I'd be skinning rabbits, or I'd be grilling a deer, or I'd be, you know, plucking pheasants, thought nothing of it. And classic Scottish Presbyterianism, my father said to me when I was 12, what are you going to do for a job? And I thought he meant when I grew up, he meant at 12. What job are you going to go and get? Because you were expected to go to work and hand your mother, my mother, half my earnings for my board and lodging from the age of 12. If I tried that with my kids, they'd have kicked off hoo-ha. So it was very logical, whilst my friends were working selling cosmetics and boots, or they were selling fashion in Littlewoods. What I did was my Saturday job was in a butcher shop.
Right.
So,
Okay, crikey, yes.
Yeah, I went from the rabbits to the butcher shop. And the anatomy in some ways was just like a different butcher shop. It was a different animal, but it was still muscle and bone and heart and liver and lungs. So I'd had, I think, that initiation before I started in the dissecting room, but you never lose the importance of the fact that you are now dissecting a human. There is a very different feel.
I should imagine that early work in the butcher shop probably helped with identifying bones that aren't human remains.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, if you watch a skilled butcher, they know exactly where to place the knife in, and they know exactly what the curve of bone will be like underneath, so they can remove the muscle. So you are left with all these beautiful bones, and they're the most glorious white color that, you know, when you see them against the red meat, the contrast is beautiful. I find a butcher shop to be something that is really artistic in terms of its presentation. There's nothing nicer to me than an ordered butcher shop.
I can see similarities there somehow. Right, that's fascinating. Right, should we talk about your first cue card, which is essentially human remains are found. So
can I just say this was so much fun, and I can only thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. As you might understand, I like telling stories, and forensic science in general is usually about stories. They've usually got a start, and hopefully, if we've done our job, they've got an end. And usually the start is because somebody has found something. And in this case, what we have is we have some skeletal remains that are found in a woodland. And that's not an uncommon thing to happen. Certainly if you go up into Scotland, where you have a less densely populated area, sometimes human remains can lie around on the surface for a very long time. It doesn't tend to happen so much in cities, but it does happen in rural environments more.
I will say as well, having read a couple of your books now as well, it is the way you tackle this is incredibly humane. So it's hard to describe, but the sort of respect you deal with this throughout is quite extraordinary.
I think there's two parts to that. You never ever should lose the sight that this is somebody's son, daughter, mother, father, friend. And somewhere out there, you hope that there will be somebody who's missing them. Some of the worst things are when we find bodies and we can't identify who they were because nobody has ever reported them missing. And that's really sad, that you can go through your life and at the end of it, there's nobody mourning the fact that you're no longer in it. So we take that side of it really, really seriously, that this is not just an inanimate object. This body was at some point a living person with their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own loves, their own friendships. But we have to have a clinical detachment as well, because our job is to be the scientist. We're not there to investigate the crime. That's what the police do. We're not there to find somebody guilty of the murder. That's what the jury does. So we're a part of a team, and in that team, we've all got our own very well-defined jobs. And my job is to find the evidence, to recover the evidence, to analyze that evidence, to give an opinion on it, and then to present it in court. If I stray outside that remit, then I'm not helping anybody. I'm not helping my own ability to cope with some of the dreadful things we see. Because one of the things, the piece of advice that was given to me by a police officer many years ago was, some of the cases you have will be horrendous. Don't own the guilt. And what he meant by that is, I didn't cause it. I couldn't have stopped it. It's not my job. My job is just to do what my expertise requires me to do. And that kind of protects yourself. But it also means that when you come to the case, you're unbiased. So you're impartial. You're not trying to find somebody responsible. You're not living the pain or the grief of other people. You're simply just doing your job, but doing your job with respect. And I think that they're not two different things. One very much follows into the other.
Bones or remains are found in a wooded area here. Is our forensic anthropologist on the scene? Well, at what point in this sort of process would they be notified?
So somebody will have found the bones, and most likely and most often it's somebody out walking your dog. So, if you want an easy time in life, get rid of a dog, get a goldfish, because when you're out walking that dog, its sense of smell is so much better than anyone else's. They will find the decomposing body. And so most likely a member of the public will alert the police that they think they found something. The police will then go out and they'll have a look, and it may be obvious because there may be a skull visible, or it might not be too sure whether it is a human or it's a bit of horse or it's a bit of cow or something. And so they might take a photograph and send us the photograph that says, look, we're at the scene just now, we've got this, what do you think? And so I've had some wonderful photographs where I've been able to say, look, I think the hooves and the fur are a fairly good indicator this isn't human. And so we don't need to go out to the scene, and they can remove the deer or whatever it was. But when it's human, it's very obvious. So we will confirm to them, yes, it's human. And then they will decide whether we need to go out to the scene or not. We would usually advise that we do, because we're trained to identify every single bone or part of a bone in the human body. And there are about 206 bones in the adult skeleton and many, many more in a child. So we always advise we should be there. And by the time we get there, the police will put up a cordon. So they'll be keeping all the public away. You go to the outer cordon, which is as far as anybody can get, and you'll sign in to the inner cordon. And the inner cordon then becomes the crime scene. And only people who are actively involved in the crime scene move into the inner cordon. But there will be police there. There will be photographers. There will be exhibits or production officers. So as things are lifted, they'll be recorded and put into bags. And there'll be the senior investigating officer whose responsibility it is to investigate that crime. And probably a scene manager who's responsible for ensuring that all the necessary bits of kit and all the necessary experts all come together. Because the really important thing is that once you've disturbed a crime scene, you can't go back and recreate it because you've gone in and disturbed it. So you really only get one chance. And it's not a quick process. It takes a long time.
And presumably, depending on the length of time the remains have been there, animals may have moved bits on, which makes your role more important. Rather than, I seem to recall in your book, you mentioned and I think we discussed it in one of our other videos with experts, how a seal flipper effectively can look similar-ish to a human hand once it's decomposed.
Yeah. Well, it's a pentadactyl limb, which means it has 5 digits. And, you know, we used to get phone calls from the police every single weekend. Oh, we found a human hand on the beach. And we're going, I'll bet you haven't. I'll bet it's a seal flipper. And it always was a seal flipper.
That's the likely to occur a lot more on the west coast of Scotland, I suspect, than in the Midlands. Excellent. So we're going to move on to card 2, which we've called Unidentified Body here. And it's about the process of starting to pull together who this person could have been, looking for, I guess, identifying features, things on the remains which might relate to missing persons and things like that.
Yeah. So the first thing that will happen is the police will say to us, how long do you think the body's been here? And so if it's a very fresh body, they'll know that they're looking for somebody who's gone missing relatively recently. If it's skeletal, and depending where we are in the world, then that may be, of course, a much longer period. And they will look at their missing persons in that region. And they'll say, so-and-so went missing 5 years ago. I wonder if it could be him. And that starts the process for them for identifying possible individuals. But of course, until we've looked at the bones, we don't have the information we need. And all of us can be categorized into 4 broad pigeonholes. There's variation within it, and that's important for us to remember. Much of the time, we can determine whether the individual was male or female, because by and large, sex determination is bimodal. But of course, that's not always true. So we will have individuals who will transgender from one to the other. And sometimes circumstantial evidence may show that it's female clothing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what you have is an individual who was biologically female. And sometimes family don't know that the person is living another life. So in somebody who is cross-dressing, for example, they may be found in female clothing, but family will never have known that this sort of femininity element was there. So when we look at the skeleton, by and large, we're looking for the sex that the individual was biologically when they went through puberty. And obviously, if you take drugs, and drugs, I mean in particular in relation to sex steroids, so either testosterone or estrogen, when you're a teenager, so if you're biologically male, but you take estrogen, or biologically female and you take testosterone when you're a teenager, that will affect the skeleton. So that's why I say it's not simply straightforward to be able to say male or female. We have to be aware of those areas in between.
That's fascinating. So those hormones effectively, well, as we can see visibly most of the time, actually affect the way the skeleton grows.
Yes.
And all that sort of stuff. And
so the cells that you have within the bones respond to the pharmacological and biochemical soup in which they live. And if you change the profile of those chemicals, then the bones will react differently.